Welcome to our first town hall. We're glad that you took the time to become part of something that's going to take time, but it's going to make a difference over time. My name's Kevin, and I'm here with my good friend Curtis.
How's everybody doing? All right.
And we are going to be having an honest, open, and fully in-depth conversation about the gang problem that's plaguing our youth, and also some of the things to look for, but more importantly, rather than just have a conversation about where we're at, we want to talk about solutions.
Yeah, and we also said too that we wanted to come as parents, and that's how we are coming to you today, as parents talking to parents, guardians talking to guardians. We want to make sure that there's no barrier between communication.
And one of the things that we have established that we believe is part of the greater program that we have in youth violence is that we can't do this alone. And so we've had conversations, and the easiest way that we like to outline it is there's 4 corners that we believe each strong and resilient community has to have. And that's faith, family, education, and government. And all of those 4 corners have to be intact for things to work. And over time, different pieces of those corners don't necessarily look the way we want, or they fall into different segments of trouble or ill attention and so forth. And so we want to talk about all of those, and we want to have this conversation. We're going to have an honest conversation. And as we do that, we're not going to just have the conversation ourselves. We've got 3 of probably the smartest people that we know locally to us to help participate with that. So I'm going to identify who they are, introduce them, and ask them to come take their seat up in the front as we go through this. The very first is Andre King. He's an intelligence coordinator for the Gulf Coast Technology Center, which is a portion of the City of Mobile Police Department. And Andre has many years' experience working with youth and also in the identification and sort of intervention in the gang world. We also joined by the great Dr. Trey Stefurak from the University of South Alabama. He is an associate dean and professional of counseling psychology. And I'll let Curtis introduce our last guest because they work closely together.
Our last guest is Corporal Nathaniel McCarty. He is supervisor of the Family Intervention Team Victim Services Program, our mental health co-response that we launched in the city about 2 years ago. He plays a huge part in helping us try to bring our community together.
So the way this will work, we're going to have a discussion, talk about some topics, and then we've got an opportunity for questions and answers in the end. There's nothing that we don't think is not important enough for you to ask, but all we would ask is that we keep the questions the best we can focused on the gang-related issues that we're going to discuss tonight because we have a limited time. And so we really want to try and make a positive impact. Here's the thing, and I'll just throw this out there. We can't do this alone. It takes everybody in this room and everybody in this room that knows somebody, those people, to come alongside us. This isn't something that's going to fix itself overnight either. It took us a pretty long time to get here, and so it may take us a little while to get out of here. But if we make positive traction, if we move in the right direction, we can absolutely take a hold of really which is an epidemic, if you will, of just bad influence and how we allow those influences and associations to change the course of activity in our lives, specifically among the youth.
I will say this too, that oftentimes we talk about kitchen table issues. Once upon a time, we would come together as a family and we would sit around the table and we would discuss things. We don't do that anymore. And I don't know if we will ever do that again as a society, although some families still do today, and that's a great thing. But what we're hoping to do is to bring conversation to those who are looking to have dialogue with us about those things that matter to them, but they're not talking to the right people to get the information they need.
And the real premise behind this, a good friend of ours and somebody that works on our team had mentioned when we had this idea that really what we're asking for is people to stand in the gap. Right. And that sort of thing has been around for a very long time, but what does it really mean? Honestly, to us, it means that you don't have to necessarily agree with everything I say or everything Curtis says, but can we agree that we want to work together to make things better? And if we can, then you're in the right place and you can participate in this discussion in a meaningful way, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. Everybody has their own story. We'd love for your story to play a part of how the bigger story ends, and we want to respect that, respect your time, and respect the conversation. So we appreciate that. I'm going to start in the very beginning and see if we can't get Andre King to tell us a little bit about gang identifiers. What are some of the things that are out there that you should be aware of so that you don't get caught off guard having these conversations specifically with your children. Andre?
Hey, good evening. Hey, I'm happy to be here. I feel very passionate about informing parents about youth gang violence. It's very serious in our community, and I'm happy to be here. First off, I want to let you know we're not dealing with traditional gangs. It's more of hybrid gangs these days. They defy the traditional gang. They are not territory specific at all. They lack leadership. They claim multiple gang affiliations. 3 or more members may be involved in that gang, and they do a common goal of committing criminal acts regardless of their primary gang affiliation. They usually have a 12 to 18-month lifespan before the gang changes its names. They merge with another gang or it just dissolves. There's no membership requirement at all. It's usually friends, classmates, family members they grew up with. You can go ahead to the next slide. I want to show some pictures of some gang identifiers so you're aware. So these are just a few of several identifiers that exist in our community. They wear necklaces, maybe tattoos on their hands, tattoos on their neck, facial area. Here you got a guy throwing up signs, and that specific sign is a sign of disrespect to another gang member. And then there you got on your arm tattoo, another gang identifier here that we're seeing here locally in Mobile. Another thing that's very important, social media. I will advise parents to check social media pages. In the bio of their Instagram or Facebook page, whatever they have, check the social media page, see what the acronyms mean on that page. These are some examples that you may see that's showing gang affiliation. I would just advise you to ask that teenager or young male what that means to be more informative, because they know what they typed on their Instagram bio. This is another key identifier. On social media, it's very important. If you just look at your children's social media, if they have a acronym in front of their name or something you do not know of, once again, question them. As you see here, you got KFN, such and such. Ask the child, what is KFN? You got on the other side, you got South End, J-Mon. Simply ask him, what is South End? Why can't he go by his first name, last name? Or some kind of nickname that you provided him. So just small clues that parents may not know, but they are out there. So it's very important to find out what these acronyms is in front of their name. Some common terms I want to share with people is so many acronyms, so many common terms. Text is full of slang messages. As you see, you got AF, it stands for ass, full letter F word. We all know what that is. You got dead. That just means something that's so funny, they just laughing. Dope pretty much mean cool or awesome. GOAT, you may hear that all the time, simply mean greatest of all time. No cap, get kind of confusing sometimes, but no cap, it simply mean it's no lie. So if they say that's cap, it's pretty much they lying. No cap, totally true or no lie. Spin, if you see that in a text message, they may spin a block on their ops. Ops mean opponents they beefing with. Basically, spin a block means shoot up the block where the opposing gang members are residing at. And then you got crash out, to go off on a spree to commit violence. So basically, I'm gonna go crash out. They use a lot of emojis. Here, I just use a few. You got the coffin, dead body, of course. That tornado is for spinning the block. You got your raindrops there. That could be several different meanings. It could be an example like, I'm gonna wet you up, and that basically leave you leaking and shoot you up. So that's some common terms, but like I said, if you have any questions or wanna get clearer identification on a specific term, feel free to ask at the end of the session. Another thing that we're seeing a lot of these days is something called drill music. It's another form of rap. It just focuses more on the violence and the brutality of the streets. The lyrics and the music videos may hold clues to gang affiliation and the types of crimes committed or they will commit. The location of the music video is very significant. For example, it may be held somewhere where a gang member died or they had a shootout, and they'll make a video on YouTube and dissing the op to generate views. The people in that group would share that YouTube video, and it's a diss against other people on the internet, and it just gains status on the internet. So that's exactly what it does. Social media, we all know what social media is. A lot of things we see around here that they use is Facebook, Instagram, and Clubhouse. Clubhouse, if you never heard of it, all it is a social audio app where thousands of users can get in one room and they can communicate through audio. It can accommodate thousands of users, and they get in one group and just chat about whatever they want. So why social media is so important to these hybrid gangs? It's less traceable. It's instant gratification. They can have the ability to share drill music, their slogans, and they can taunt their opponents online, their ops online. And that's how they start their altercations and beef online. And when they see each other in the streets, then it's on site, as they call it.
Well, thank you, Andre. I'm kind of perplexed sometimes when you think about how many decisions we make on a given day. Hundreds, if not thousands of decisions. And every one of those decisions is influenced by something. It may be our experience, our background, our own story. So influence plays a tremendous role in our own lives. How does influence play an important role even in a youth's life, right? So they have a shorter time period to assess those things that create their own story that allow them to make decisions, and yet they're influenced by so many people because of association around them. Making those choices.
And I would add to that this is what we call hiding in plain sight. Okay, social media is typically hiding in plain sight. When I say that, I mean that the influences, as Kevin just spoke of, they're constant. They're not just at school. They're not just after school. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week, because your technology device, your cell phone or your computer, allows this indoctrination and this reinforced influence to continue, where it takes your place in guiding your youth, your child, in the things that you want them to actually model. So there are a ton of different influences out there, and there are a lot of things that parents are actually inundated with, and oftentimes we don't begin to look for the things that are hiding in plain sight.
And I think this is a perfect opportunity. We have a great panel here that can help us with that. And I want to turn to Dr. Stefurak for just a second and really get some insight into some of the things that are influencing our youth and how the decisions are being made that are ultimately putting them in the wrong place at the wrong time in many situations.
Sure. So just a little context. I've spent about 20 years working with juvenile offenders, 16 with the Mobile County Juvenile Court, as a researcher, as a psychologist. So probably seen thousands of cases at the point of being involved with the court. Hundreds of those probably had the types of gang affiliation behaviors or tattoos and things like that. So it's certainly not the majority of young children that come through the court. So that's a little just my background. So we thought about gangs for about 100 years in America, right? If you ever seen the movie Gangs in New York, for example, like this is a unique American phenomenon in some ways not. And so we've thought as researchers and community invested people for at least 60 years about why does this happen? So just a quick review of the influences that have been cited, and some of it there's good evidence for. The two simple ones are family and school, right? If you don't have family bonds, if you don't have go home to people who you feel like have your back, who are willing to support you in developing an identity, in pursuing something that's meaningful to you, or if they're just not present. That's obviously a risk factor, not specifically for gangs, but all the behaviors that lead up to a gang. And then there was a study in Mobile, the RAMP study in 2010s, that found one of the major routes to dropout was being overage and unaccredited in school, so being more than 1 or 2 years behind. We did a parallel study in the juvenile court and looked at what predicted whether a kid ever committed a violent crime. And same pattern, family dysfunction indicators, and also if they were underage, underaccredited, if they had lots of disciplinary issues. So school and family are where we forge our identity. We find out who we are. You could add church to that. The streets is not a good place to find out who you are. It will tell you who you are, but the answers it gives usually are don't care about you and are to your detriment. So when families break down, when schools break down, we're certainly at risk. With COVID, you also would be remiss not to point out that we're in the midst of a very challenging era with schools and with families. There's lots of evidence families are more stressed than ever, and that schools are struggling. Alabama students are behind at least 2 grade levels on average. There's some of the data. So all those risk factors for delinquency and being involved in a gang and what that leads to is a high rate of you ended up being killed. We have a lot of stuff that's gotten worse around that. So all that, but the thing I want to hone in on is most of the people that think about gangs see them as a replacement for unmet needs. So needs a family, a church community, a peer community at school, teachers would normally meet. If you don't have that, the human being is going to find a source of identity. We are going to find, we talk about clout, right? So there's really, in some way, not a difference between a teenager finding clout and reputation in a gang, and I'm not saying these are the same things, but you look at other really things we value, like the military, full of rituals that show significance and meaning and status, show you what you've accomplished. My son and I play video games, right? What are all the video games about? You get little badges and rewards and you level up so that's just baked into being human that we want to feel like we're on a journey somewhere, that we're somebody. And more importantly, we want to know that there's an audience to all that. We want to know that people are seeing us and know us and are going to share in that with us. So it's not a good thing, but at some sense, that's what a gang provides. It's not what we want, but we're not going to solve it by continuing to have those needs go unmet. So a lot of the programming you'll look around the country over several decades has been trying to identify kids that are at risk, but then trying to intervene by meeting those needs, validating those needs, but meeting them in a healthier way.
Trey, you said something earlier about family dysfunction, and I think people get lost with that term just a little bit.
Yeah, it's a little psychologist term, sorry.
I know, it's okay, but it doesn't mean what we traditionally think it means in the sense of what he's talking about. You can have a very normal family, a family that functions normally. They're not dysfunctional. They're just not communicating.
Yes. So you can have a family that never hits each other, never does drugs together, but they communicate through their phones, if at all. They're never in the same room together, which is part of why they're not conflicting with each other. You also can have families that do conflict with each other. You can get to the same bad result through a bunch of different ways that we would call family dysfunction. But the core issue is a lack of communication, because you can't have an audience, you can't be known, you can't be shaped and validated in identity if there's not people to do that with. And so even families that are, let's say, aren't in poverty, aren't stressed, but right now you'll go to the restaurant, and I'm probably guilty of this too, and you look at a whole family of 5 people, what are they doing? On their phones, right? And I try to stop. Sometimes I get people like Commander Graves emailing me and I got to respond. But so I think the risk profile for a lot of these problems has gone up in the last decade because of that. I guess one last thing I'd say on that is I have a 16-year-old. Most weeks I don't think he's at risk of anything like this, but it depends on the week. He has not had social media till last month. And that was by design. There's a lot of and I know some of the young people in the room are like, get this man off the stage. Why is he saying that? But and even now, it is highly monitored. Now, not completely, but I mean, it's random checks. It's like the slot machine at the casino. It pays out. You don't know when. I'm going to check on it. He's never going to know. If I don't see anything, I don't hassle him. But I'm looking, right? And a lot of the stuff Andre talked about, I told him I learned a few things from some of that. So I think the hard part for parenting is this is like a whole other job, obviously. There's the parenting job, but now with technology, some of the challenges that COVID's created, the job's even harder. And I guess I just want to say the answer, we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem, though we're going to have to arrest people sometimes. We have got to come up with solutions that meet those needs for kids, right? If we get to it, I got a list of examples in our community. I always tell Commander Graves, we're doing more than we realize. We really are doing more than we realize in Mobile.
So you brought up some great examples, and we're talking about family and influences. I want to spend just another second there, Curtis, if I can. We've got Corporal McCarty here with us, who spends a great deal of his day, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I observe, working with people hand in hand who spend their time trying to get involved in families and family situations. So based on what the doctor has just told us and what you've heard from Andre there, what are your thoughts about influence? And you see sort of a different perspective on that. If you could just kind of share with us a few thoughts.
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. Very glad to be here. So what I see from that aspect, so I supervise the family intervention team for the Mobile Police Department. And what you would typically have is a parent that comes to you that is really crying out for help. So let's look at the first thing. Our young people really want to be accepted in some way. And so they look at gangs as an opportunity to be accepted and have love shown and respected, right? But the problem is it's leading them down the wrong path. So we talk about unstable and broken homes and economic instability. These are the things that really hurt our young people. And then we go back to social media. So everything is at their fingertips, right? So the stuff that we were kind of protected from when we were growing up, they have it right there in their hands. So they get that instant gratification, like Andre said, getting the likes. And you'll find that some people are living lives on social media and they're living a totally different life when they get off the phone. So that's some of the biggest things that we have. We're talking about violence in the home and the community, right? So much has gone on in the city of Mobile just because someone said they were affiliated with something, right? You see pictures and someone throwing up, like Andre showed, cracking fours and but is another one just a four like that?
Just a four.
Just a four like that. And we have parents that really are trying to get some help. They're crying out trying to get some help. But the family intervention team tries to give those resources because what are these families missing? They're missing a lot of stuff. Like you said, like Dr. Safirik said, sometimes we just come in the house and we communicate in the same house through a telephone. Now, how many of y'all by show of hands honestly have done that lately? I have. I have 2 kids in college and I got 2 in the 8th grade, right? I'm very busy. So, yeah, it's easy to communicate like that. But what you're missing is that human touch. And a lot of our young people do not have that human touch. And it's hard to communicate when you don't have that human touch.
I'll say this. I don't think there's ever been a time in history where it's this hard for youth to be a kid. And I will say the same thing for parents. There's never been a tougher time than now for parents to really, really understand what it is to be an active, engaged parent, because we are inundated with so much every day. And oftentimes those things that are most important go ignored, not intentionally always. Sometimes it is just the nature of the beast because the beast has you moving constantly. You're working, you're doing double shifts, and your child is opening. And I mean, their latchkey kid is what we used to call it back in the day. But now they don't just go home. And if they do go home, they go home with someone on their phone. And that person on their phone they're going home with is feeding them poison. They're influencing them in ways in which we can't even begin to understand. And you don't know because it's a silent person. It's almost like when we talk about some of the other things that have nothing to do with this, but it's more of pedophiles. I'll say that someone who has access to your home through the internet, and if you're not monitoring your child's computer, then you don't know what's going on. And the same thing applies with activity like this. We have people who do not mean your child any good whatsoever, but they have just as much influence as someone who is looking at them for other reasons.
And I want to kind of talk for a minute about something, because you said, it's never been harder to be a child. It's never been harder to be a parent. I believe that that's true. I think that's been true in every generation. I think every generation has faced something that's been significantly difficult. And amazingly, we've come to meet the challenge. And I always tell people, I've got a church group that I help lead, and I often tell them, hey, you climb when it's hardest, because we get complacent when it's easy. And so you have to prepare yourself. And I feel like now's, the best way to describe it is maybe now's just that time we need to really focus on how do we climb. And we have to keep walking. And, I want to talk about the new Alabama gang prevention law. And let's just talk about the topic of this first before I go to the panel. The name of the law itself is the Alabama Gang Prevention Law. And I feel like there's some teeth in having that law. And I think part of this purpose of having this meeting is this town hall is so that we can discuss it. But I will also go back to where my heart is. And honestly, my heart is we cannot arrest our way out of it, which means there is a law. This law may help do something in certain situations, but isn't our job to prevent it with the people who sit in this room? And I believe that, and I believe that's why you're here. So from my perspective, I want to talk about the law so that we're informed of it. I'm sure it has its place in different scenarios, but the reality of it is you are not going to be able to arrest your way out of a situation, but nonetheless, this law exists. And so how do we keep our children in a safe environment, making good decisions to where they stay within the reach of our guidance and don't fall within the reach of the law, which ultimately is set in place? And so now we sort of have, if we're climbing when it's hardest, we also are climbing between guardrails, and that makes it just a little more challenging. So I know Curtis has a good thought on this.
I do. I would just say, too, so for people who are thinking that Alabama's the first to actually come up with this, we're not. We are actually coming late to the party, to be honest. I have something here I want to read to you. 45 jurisdictions, including 43 states, D.C., and the U.S. have laws that define gang-related terms. Then we have 41 jurisdictions, including 39 states, D.C., and the U.S., have passed laws that may be used to prevent gang violence, reduce gang involvement, and suppress gang-related crime. They all have their gang law in place because they're seeing the same things we're seeing. We're just now getting to the party trying to address this problem from a legal standpoint as they have.
So let me turn to Andre for just a second, if you don't mind helping us out with this conversation based on what we're talking about. Let's talk about some of the identifiers first that are in this law so that we at least have an understanding of what we're talking about, what's in the law, and then we'll kind of go to our corner edge panelists here and get some thought on, okay, how do we avoid even becoming susceptible to this law? What are some behavior changes that we can make and that we can be positive influence on? So every bad influence needs to be countered by a good influence or more, and so we want to talk about that as well. And so Andre, let's first start, just you're somewhat familiar with this, I believe. Yeah. So can we just discuss some of the things that might be parameters associated with this law?
First thing first, I just want to clarify, this law is an enhancement that's for a crime that's already been committed. It's just a complete enhancement. So, for example, if a 16-year-old commits a violent act, example, a shooting, this law, if he meets 3 out of 10 identifiers, he gets sentenced under this law. So it's an enhancement. It's not nothing separate. I just want to make sure
that's a good point.
I clarify that for now. But one of them basically admit to being a criminal enterprise gang member. So during an interview or interrogation, some of the kids may just admit to being a member of a gang. Also, another criteria is if a parent identify that child as being in a gang. He has a tattoo identified as a gang emblem. He was concerning me as well. If he's hanging out or hanging out, taking pictures with someone as a known gang member. That's concerning because you may have family, friends, your cousins may be involved in the gang, and you don't know it just because you take a picture in it. And if you meet 2 more qualifiers, you'll be sentenced under this new enhancement here. So.
Great. I appreciate you explaining that, and that's a valid point that you bring up as far as it being an enhancement. I just think that the real conversation is if we get to the point where the law has to determine whether our child is involved in gang activity, we've missed a lot of indicators along the way as parents, as influencers, as educators, as coaches, as faith-based community members, and all of those other things have been missed. And so this, to me, is honestly a last resort. Honestly, the police department has been involved in way too many cases because the police department is intended in society to be the last resort, and in many instances becomes the first or second. And that's why we really want to look at the other 3 of the 4 corners, and that's faith, family, and education. The government piece is there, but all 4 corners have to work together, and any one corner that stands on itself is not strong enough to support society and the entity that we're here to protect. I want to move real quick to this sort of last topic for just a minute, and then we'll have time to open up for questions because we do want to be respectful of your time. And let's just talk about some solutions. And I think we've got an amazing panel here. Let's talk for a few minutes about solutions, and then we'd love to open up and allow those here to ask some questions so we can get some feedback. And I'll just throw this one disclaimer at you. We came here with some positive solutions, but we're not going to preach to you and tell you that we have all the solutions. We don't. The whole purpose of having this is to begin a conversation so that we can come together and make those suggestions and have those conversations to do it. It's going to take all of us. It's not going to take just 1 or 2 of us or 3 of us or even 4 of us or even just the people in this room. It's literally going to take an entire community. And I believe our communities are going to be influenced by the communities we're surrounded by. So everybody in here has a stakehold in this. And my call to action would be, we've said time and time again, if you see something, say something. And I think that's a good saying, but I'd like to take it a step further and advocate that if you see something and you say something, do something. Be that influence, be that person. How do you fill a gap of a lack of an influence? You become a positive influence. And how do you overcome a negative influence? You find every friend, every relative, every faith-based relative you have to come into this community and to be that positive influence. Some solutions from my panel. I'll just start on the end with the good doctor down there. If you would, we'll just kind of work from the right there to the left. Just make a few suggestions or some thoughts, and let's see what solutions we think we can intervene with.
Sure. So if you go back to the theory being that gangs are developed in part to meet unmet needs for teens, I should say that is not true for every single person that joined the gang. There's a smaller subset of people that just enjoy mayhem and violence among a very small percentage of people. But the larger percentage, I think that unmet need theory is what is a way to understand it. So we want to think about programming and efforts that meet those needs. So, churches have a role to play in that. But I like how you said, if we rely on one foot of this, we're probably going to fail. And that's not to disparage any particular foot. I think churches have a strong role to play to the degree that church and that faith is relevant for that kid and that family. We have to find the faith community that's a good fit culturally for that child, for that family. But also, you just talk about public schools for a moment, any school. Just a real quick example of what's been done elsewhere that is highly effective is a general idea called problem-solving teams. And very general principle for kids at risk of gang activity, surrounding them with we would call it a multidisciplinary team. But that's not really, I think, just a village, so to speak. That would include parents, extended family, clergy. It would include anybody that has capital or relevance for that youth. And some people that don't, like teachers, probation officers, people like Commander Graves' staff, the FIT team staff. That's a place the schools could lead and to really offer a hub, not for every kid, but when we all see things, as you put it. And one of the things we do is we convene and we show that youth that we see you. We're not necessarily here to punish you, but we are going to hold you accountable. And we do this on the adult level. Well, I don't want to get into Project SCORE, Commander Graves, but we have adult programs for adults that are doing relatively low-level criminal problems, and we don't just throw them in jail. We offer them another path. I think that is definitely a gap that we should be standing in more for every kid, but particularly at-risk kids. So the reason it's not for every kid is, my kids did scouting and they did this stuff. It was enriched their lives, but if they didn't have it, they had a lot of other resources in their parents and other things. As kids lose resources, sometimes that program of community mounts is the thing that saves the day. A couple other just shout outs of programs doing this is ICU Mental Health, Demetrius Smith's organization running summer programs. They're doing that with kids way before they ever get to this point. And trying to meet kids where they are, providing enriching, interesting activities before they're ever in any way at risk of a gang. So the other principle I would say is to do this early. As much as we want to, see when kids are starting to have tattoos and these things, the ideal would be to start to notice things going wrong in elementary, 5th, 6th, 7th grade. And again, there's our own data in Mobile. That RAMP study tells that story very well. That kids that same things got addressed in middle school had a much lower likelihood of ever having problems like this. So, forming teams, forming a village, and doing it early would be the two things I would say.
I agree. I'm going to touch on two topics here at Death List on the Board. I stated one earlier. Ask about online activities. Get on Facebook, get on Instagram, take their device, go to their own Facebook page, click on it, find out who their friends are, scroll their page, ask them what this means. They take a picture, they throw hand signs up, ask them what that means.
Be nosy.
Yeah, be nosy. Be nosy. We parents, we may not know what certain acronyms mean. Ask them. Ask about all online activity. Get on Instagram. Go to Instagram. Go to their page. Make comments. Click on that person profile. Find out who they are. Online activity is very important, and I strongly believe that. And then just to touch base, get to know your children friends. Get to know them. Get to know their parents. Where they hang out at. Who you going to the football game with. Where I'm dropping you off at. If he dropping off with a group of kids, stop. Talk to the kids. See where they live at. Ask them questions. Ask them what their Facebook page is. Go to it. Look at it. So that's all I'm going to leave you with. My solutions is find out more about online activities and get to know your children friends.
Kind of piggyback on that, two great points. One, the biggest thing I did in a parent was 4 years ago. I figured out how to use parent controls on my iPhone. So every phone we have, if you spend the time, you can lock everything down. My son will tell you. I also learned to be the most obnoxious parent you have ever met. To what Nandre's saying, do not apologize for looking at that phone. You do not negotiate with terrorists. You look at the phone. You do what you think you need to do. The last thing I'd say, though, is that part about know the friends. Let me point out one thing that does. When you're being nosy and you're being assertive with their friends, let's say there's one of those friends that is what Commander Gray's alluded to, that is kind of like that cancer, unfortunately, looking to target your child. If every time they come around, you're asking questions and you want to know who they are and you want to know who their mama is, they're not going to come around anymore. So that's another effect of just being nosy. I think we've had an erosion of boundaries with our kids. I know I'm raising one, and if he calls me bruh one more time, but yeah, I'm not. It's just we got to reset boundaries and say I'm not your friend. I love you, but love means honesty. It means doing everything Andre's saying and not apologizing for it.
Right. And before I let Corporal and Cardi go, real quick, if you come across an app on your children's devices, go to a website called commonsensemedia.org. commonsensemedia.org. Simply, all that is it's a website designed to inform you about apps. If you don't know what TikTok is, type TikTok in. It'll show you what TikTok is, how to love stuff, how to hide stuff. It'll give you all the in and outs of any app you want to. So I mentioned the app earlier called Clubhouse. If you don't know what that is, go to that website. Once again, commonsensemedia.org. Type in Clubhouse. It'll give you all the in and outs about the application.
Final thoughts, Mr. Nate there?
I'm going to come at it from a family aspect of, and I'm going to just tell a quick story. So when I was coming up, I'm 41 years old, so everyone that's older than me going to understand where I'm kind of coming from. So my favorite night in the house was on Thursday night. My mom would cook either fried fish or fried chicken, baked beans. I'm telling y'all the whole meal, right? And we'll get a 2-liter Faygo or a Sprite. But we would sit together and we would watch The Cosby Show on Thursday night, followed by A Different World. Okay? That positive family dynamic. All right? I'm the only boy in my family. I'm between two girls, and my little sister would sit on my back. And she was maybe 1 year old, but as long as she could walk, she could go sit on my back. We would watch Cosby Show. We would watch Different World. And simple, right? But I remember that. I took that. Let's give our kids something to take with them as they grow. Because if we don't spend that time with them, we don't have that human touch with them, okay, then they're going to go to the gangs. Then they're going to go to the outside where they don't need to be, okay? So let's give them the environment. Let's give them the love that they need. Because guess what? As much as we want to say, oh, you kids got it easy, guess what? These kids got it pretty hard because they're living their lives on their phones. And because there's so much pressure in that phone, you don't know what they're going through mentally. You don't know what they're going through emotionally. And they don't want to tell you because you all don't have that emotional connection because you don't have that human touch. So we got to put the phone down and just simply have a meal together sometime. That's what I would break for.
That's a great thought. And Curtis, we're going to take some questions, but
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on listening to what we've discussed tonight?
I will tell you there are multiple forms of predatory behavior. When we talk about predatory behavior, it's for me, when someone gains access and influence over someone that I love, so much so that I lose control and I get to a point to where they no longer hear me or want to hear me because now they're being influenced by this behavior that is foreign from outside my family, but they have more influence on my child than I do. That's predatory behavior. So it's not just the thing that we were brought up to identify what's a predator. There are multiple forms, and this is one.
So we've got plenty of time here. We're trying to be respectful, but we've got several moments left. If you have a question or would like to ask a question, we certainly would like to open up. This is designed as a town hall meeting, so you guys have input. You're just as part of the presentation as we are. Who's got a question or has a thought or a comment they'd like to share, and we'd love to address it.
He in the games, but well, he calls himself long live this person, long live this person. And as far as what y'all saying, my mom does that. She is actually the reason she's not here now. She's at a parenting class. He went to Strickland, he went to Bay Point. They did the home counseling, they're doing the school counseling. And it's like he still doesn't get it. Like it's basically they did his psych review and everything. So even with all of that, what more should she be doing? Because everybody's telling her she's doing right, but still, he still does what he wants to do.
So I think sometimes we over rely on professionals. You'll rarely hear me say that, but sometimes we do. So a lot of the things you hear me name check would be organizations in our community that are not me, and they're not Out to Point, and they're not counselors, but they're mentors, they're churches. So when I say you need a village, that's kind of what I mean. Any parent in this battle. And then I would want to know from your brother, which I'm not going to do right now because that'd be embarrassing for him. But what is he looking for? He's a young man. He's developing. I mean, I think we got to start with young men do things because it makes sense to them. And we have to listen to, I want to hear why this makes sense. If we just start with, I don't want to hear it, stop it, then we don't ever understand what the needs that it's meeting are. So that would be the conversation. But you don't have to be a therapist or a psychiatrist. In fact, it might help if you're not one of those to have that conversation. And I think I just got back from Nesta Mobile this morning, big mentoring organization, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, 100 black men in Mobile. I mentioned ICU mental health. There, and I'd be happy I'll give you my number. Your mom can call me. We'll talk about other resources. But my main answer would be listen, but get a village. Well, he has a village of a bunch of mental health professionals,
Well,
which I'm one,
too.
but that may not be enough.
Because we have the family oriented. My mom, she makes us have dinner together, movie nights. We do all of that. We go places. She take us on vacations. We do those family things. He has grandparents that come to talk to him. We go to church. The pastor and their wife talks to him. Everybody, people that we don't even know, sit down and tell him, your mom's doing right, so what's going on? But we don't know.
Can I say something? You're doing it right now, because, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I need to give her a hand because you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because you're making him a priority. And that's what a lot of kids don't understand. Like, they don't feel like they've been made a priority. You're making him a priority.
And I would go back to what I said earlier about predatory behavior. Okay, that means something, and sometimes we don't know that that's happening because we open the door to it, because we think it's representing something that we want or something that we think represents who we are or who we want to be. And it's going to constantly feed that desire, that curiosity. So going back to what you said your mom is doing, I applaud her for all the efforts that she's putting into it. It's not easy. It's not easy for him either, okay? It's tough for him too. He's having to deal with the influences, not just on social media, but if he's in school, same thing, because those same impressionable behaviors or those influencers are there too. He's inundated with it to where it becomes cognitively, it becomes something identifiable.
And I want to add this too, and I appreciate you coming here and applauding with a round of applause is good because you've taken the first step. But I think this question also represents a truth that we oftentimes ignore. And that is that we wrap this idea of gangs into this one big thing, and we forget that this one big thing is made up of lots of individual stories. Mm-hmm. And so your brother represents an individual story. And so without calling him out in front of this group, I would say, let's get him connected with some folks that can learn that individual story and figure out what it is he wants, because we can push a lot of things in a direction, but if it's not being received, if it's not wanted, it's going to be an uphill battle. You're taking the right step, but there's obviously something that's being searched for. There's something that's being desired, and there's something that's wanted. And we need to change the influence cycle of what that is that's causing those questions, so that what we want and what we seek is consistent with where we want to drive that person. And I feel like this is the first step in that. So thank you for asking the question and being brave enough to ask the first question, which is always hard in an audience. Does anyone else have a question? You, sir.
I appreciate the law enforcement effort and everything, but it's very reactive. And there's a lot of effort, it seems to me, I'm lay, I don't understand, I'm not familiar with the budget of the city, but there's a lot of costs going into this reactive situation, and I'm wondering how much is going in the proactive situation. When I was coming up, intramural sports was very important in the development of my age and my youth. It showed discipline, it taught us discipline, it taught us collaboration, it gave us goals and things to achieve in a collective effort. And so right now I'm wondering, if I look around the parks of the city, especially those in the inner city, I don't see that much intramural efforts in terms of bringing, whether it be outside or inside force, to develop those type of team-oriented activities to sort of train these gentlemen a different approach to how to address their energies and collaboration than after the fact when they're affiliated with the gang.
I will tell you this, you are spot on that oftentimes funding is not addressed on the front end, it's addressed on the back end of dealing with things. And law enforcement in and of itself, the true measurement of law enforcement, and he knows this, we talk about it all the time, it's not about how many people you arrest, but it's how many people you avoid arresting. So prevention is key, and educating people is a huge part of that, trying to get people to understand what the law is, because in school these days, we don't teach civics, we don't teach these basic things that we once upon a time heard about in a classroom setting. We don't do that anymore. So what's happening now, because it's not being talked about at the kitchen table either. So behaviors are being manifested because of some of the things you mentioned. They're not activities. Sometimes that's due to attrition. Sometimes it's due to schools having such a foothold on sports that it takes away from some of the park activities or funding that may go toward parks for students, for kids to do things. So there are a number of different variations. We can talk about it all day, but the point will still be the same. that you've gotten to, and that is that there are less activities than there should be, especially with what we're facing now with technology, because technology is the activity today. Okay, that's the activity. It's not going outside playing. It's not outside learning how to build positive pro-social skills and engagement, having conversations, and being able to de-escalate situations and learning how to read body language. All that stuff cannot be done on a phone. So when we emotionally respond to things on a phone, first of all, it's permanent, okay? And I have to now live with that. And now I'm tasked with not only living with it, but also being challenged by what I may have expressed on that phone to someone. And if I don't do what they think I should do, those who are influencing me to do something negative, then I now become the person who is targeted. Yeah.
And I appreciate you raising that point. It's a great question. We need to have the discussion.
I'll end with this. We're saying the same thing,
Right.
but we don't have a solution because the tax dollars are being diverted in the most ineffective way in resolving the issue.
So I will tell you this, just that not certainly not to counter what you're saying, because I feel like you have a very valid point, and I appreciate you bringing that up. There is a smaller segment of law enforcement in the city that adopts what you're saying, and that needs to grow. And so more people need to see the benefit of the preventative strategies. I get to see both worlds because working in this agency, working where I work, I see a lot of what you're talking about. And pretty much everybody sitting up here is in the preventative stage, but we're a very small number within the department. We oftentimes, and anybody that knows me knows I speak my mind, and sometimes people don't agree with me, but I'm going to at least tell you what I'm thinking, and hopefully you'll accept my opinion, but I believe it's the truth. I spend a lot of time screaming exactly what you're saying, because I believe if we're going to spend money, we should invest money in something that yields the outcome we want, not the output. And the output is, we can stop at any street corner and we can wait long enough and probably make a case on something, but that's not what we're designed to do. Actually, the law enforcement entity itself is supposed to be part of the community. And so I think these conversations and having outcries from the citizen, you identified yourself as a lay citizen. I don't see it that way. I see you as a team member just as I am, and I feel like if I'm pushing from where I am and you can push from where you are, then maybe somebody will listen one day that has the ability to sign a few dollars into a program. And then I take what he says is there's not much cry for a lot of the athleticism in the community because there are other alternatives. And so we've got to sort of cut off that sort of distraction and allow that opportunity. So it's a time in progress. And the last thing I'll say too is we often think of the young males in our community, but shockingly, I'll tell you that we also need to be concerned about our young ladies because there is an increasing growth in bad associative adolescent behavior in gangs or otherwise that infect the female thought process as well. And so I think that's something just to throw out there, and I appreciate you. Does anyone else have a question? We can pass this mic.
Just add one quick thing to very briefly, but one of the other challenges there, my working simply with kids that are having problems my whole life, is a lot of citizenry, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong. You mentioned the idea of kids with those types of struggles congregating in activities, and I find a gut reaction against that. So it's the funding, but I think we need to be honest that there's also in many communities, and you can bind up in racism and some of that at times, and bias towards boys. And some of that's well-founded, because sometimes when that happens, bad things happen. But it's a challenge from a political and funding and advocacy standpoint. When we talk about bringing young people together, particularly young people that have struggled, there's always going to be a segment of our community that is highly skeptical and thinks that just nothing good can come of that. And I'm not dismissing them, but we've got to have that dialogue. Every community does, to say here's what can come of it, here's why it's worth doing, and we got to do it well. And we have to have, and I would agree, you're not a layperson, you're a citizen. And we need citizens willing, and again, I got back from this wonderful event this morning with 300 people, that's just one organization, willing to give their time for kids that are struggling. And if we got that, we're going to be okay.
And I agree wholeheartedly with your point, but I think those are mostly culture indices, more so than they are any type of other ethnicities or characterizations. So therefore, if they're culture indices, you have to do this on a case-by-case or market-by-market basis, and try to go into those communities to find out what that culture is and how to identify to make that change.
The biases are not uniform. Whatever the obstacles are, they're going to be. That's what makes it very hard, is you can't generalize very easily. And that's why I would say I wouldn't point that out to dismiss people with those concerns. We need to relearn how to talk to each other and address those concerns. And I want you, who was worried about doing something like that, how do I get you to become a stakeholder? I want to hear your concerns. And you're right, they're going to be unique to you, the culture you're in. But my goal,
I am a stakeholder.
yeah, is to get
I
you
am proactive
to
towards
say I'm not talking about you, but like
No,
that person
I'm
objecting.
not saying
Yeah.
you are, but I'm saying that to be an advocate.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. I got a question and a comment. I guess my comment is I heard you allude to the fact that, the family love that you experience, and that love is a very vital part of everything that we do as humans. And we need to, I believe that there's a unwritten understanding that love is always conditional. But there's also another type of love, and that's unconditional. And I believe that if we exercise and begin to implement that more often in our daily routine, just daily, it's going to actually pour out and get into our youth where we need it to be the most. And I'm just, it just reminds me of the incident with the young lady that apparently felt like she didn't have anyone that loved her, and she took her own life. Because had she known that someone loved her and the magnitude of their love, she may not have made that decision. And to make the question is, can we commit to maybe sitting down later and have this dialogue about the preventive measures and things that we can go to in different communities?
I would say this: we would love to have that conversation. We've been working on. We do that conversation now on a podcast,
Okay.
but
Well,
we would love to.
I'd like to see us come in and sit down with you, and let's begin some dialogue that we can take back to our community and begin to implement on our block, in our family. That's going to spread out into the community. Because, you don't eat an elephant, the whole leg at a time. You eat one bite at a time. And so if you got one community individual that's willing to say, hey, listen, Commander, can I come over and see you on Thursday? Can we do lunch? Then I say, can we do that? And we'll make a commitment to meet with us so that we can begin this dialogue, so that we can implement these things that we're talking about.
Love it. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'll call you tomorrow.
Got a
Oh,
car
I
for
ain't
you.
playing. I'm real.
I got a
I'll call
card
tomorrow,
for you.
man.
Good evening to everybody, to the panel and everybody that's here. Good to see my good friend Reverend Edwards. First I'd like to say something. I'd like to say something that probably nobody in this room wants to hear. It is not the government's job to raise our children, to house you, to feed you, to clothe you. I went to a private school. That was one time that we weren't even allowed to go into public schools. And so we had our little private schools all around the community. We're dependent on the government to do what we're supposed to be doing. The police can't fix this. All right, I have to say that because we want the police, we want everybody else to come in, rush in, and save us. No, we created this monster where we're not disciplining our children. So we can go around. Great doctor, we appreciate you for all your work with mental. So, but see, when I come up, we didn't take Ritalin. It was a belt. We ain't take no medication. If Johnny wouldn't sit down, my aunt had a way to sit you down and calm you down too. So we waiting on the government to do far too much for us that we should have been doing ourselves. Now let me say this. I gotta say this. I'm gonna say this. That we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. That ain't the police department. And powers, against the rulers of darkness in this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Let me tell you something. This stuff is spiritual. We can put it on these phones. We can blame it on the internet, on Facebook, on Instagram. This stuff is spiritual, and we're gonna have to have a spiritual intervention. I did all I could with my son and daughter, and my son still chose to take a bad route. Am I right, Curtis? Curtis did everything he could to help me with my son. He chose a different route. Did I shed a tear? No, sir. He made his bed. He has to lie in it. We have got to stop depending on the government to solve these problems.
Well, Nick, I'll tell you this. I think you're absolutely right. But we said earlier that we came here not as law enforcement, but as parents talking to parents. And that's how we lead. We lead as parents talking to parents, are those who are mentors to young people and mentors to adults, because adults need mentors too, some of them. Okay? So that's how we approach this. So you're right. Government has too much of a reach in too many things, and there's a dependency that takes away any sense of a wherewithal to be responsible and accountable for self. So, but that's not what we're subscribing to. We're subscribing to anchoring together as community, as parents, concerned citizens, and tackling this issue that we all see being a huge issue for us and in a very dark world that we're trying to actually get through together.
I don't need the mic. Yes. just I guess I've been working with youth since for a while. My question is, since this is a gang intervention, what are you all doing on the level as far as entering into the schools, and what do you give for kids or students who are in gangs in the school system? Do you come into the school, and also, do you have a program? I know the FIT program. I actually work with Excel, and the FIT program comes into Excel. But other than that, are there programs where you reach out to those kids, and I'm not going to say try to divert them, but you do give them principles and things to stand on, or why you shouldn't do this? Is that something that you do around Mobile without the FIT team, or is that only if you are a part of the FIT team?
You want to answer that? Sure.
So something that we started this year, and so we have someone that's absent from our panel that's a big part of this, and that's our Youth Violence Prevention Coordinator, Joshua Jones. But and I'm just give you an example, and I'm not going to say any names, but we identified a couple of targets that we did a little background. See, a lot of times, a lot of people don't think we do our background, our research on individuals that come to us, but we did a little research, and what we did was we recognized that we had 2 young men that had some positive factors about them that we can try to get in. So it's totally our effort to go in and mentor these young men. And how do we do it? We show up at their football game. They're 2 football players. We show up at their football games and try to be present. And just kind of going back to what we're talking about, one of the things that unites the city of Mobile is sports, football. And so I promise you, like the stuff that y'all are thinking about, we want to do it. And we're trying to find a way to get funding, like we can get some grants or something, because I believe if we get in the community like we're supposed to be, instead of you seeing me with blue lights, I want you to call me coach, something of that sort, mentor. So they want to see the human side of you, because I don't want you to see this uniform, then automatically young people, they just shut down. I want you to see coach, hey, I need to talk to you. But going into the schools one-on-one, that's something that we do on our own. Tell you the truth, it ain't enough of us. It's a lot of kids that need us, and it's only 3 of us. So we got to try to, we're trying to figure out a way to do that. But the 2 kids that I was telling you about, I go check in with them bi-weekly just to say, hey, because they need to know that, hey, he means what he says. He's coming. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you all for sharing. We appreciate your participation. There's 4 panelists in this room that I want to thank. It's the 3 that are sitting up here, and then you collectively as a group, because I feel like this is a discussion that requires everybody to be involved in. We want to have more discussions. There's another town hall on the 14th of November at Day Spring Baptist Church. We got all the endorsements for these guys, so call them. My job is to work with them and to make sure that the resources they need are given to them so that they can be a resource to you. But thank you all for coming. If you have questions, we'll stand around here. We appreciate it, and let's keep our kids safe.